I'd like now to turn the podium over to my good friend and colleague, Chief Doug Scott of the Arlington County Police Department.
Good morning, everybody, and I'd like to echo Jim's thoughts on thanking Mr. Schallenberger and the IAFF for inviting us here today to share what we're doing in Arlington. You know, Jim talked about Columbine, and that really was an opportunity for law enforcement to take a look at how we're going to approach active shooters, not only today, but into the future. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of active shooters, and what you're going to see in the next couple of slides is a trend that's very alarming and shows the dangers that our police officers and our firefighters are facing in the response to these events. This bar graph here tells us, because of the frequency of what's occurring out there, we've got to change the way that we're reacting. Jim talked about the Marymount incident that we observed. It was at that time in 2007 that we in Arlington decided we need to work more closely with our brothers in the fire department, but we also had to train our patrol officers differently. The tactics that we were using, using a patrol response to, as Jim described, a barricade-type incident, wasn't working for us. We realized that we were now going to be asking our police officers to take a higher level of risk, and in doing so, we knew that we had to train them differently, we had to equip them differently, and we had to address this from a different policy perspective. This shot here is our SWAT team. Many of you, working with your law enforcement brothers and sisters in your community, will recognize this type of equipment. This is not how we would tackle an active shooter today. In today's world, we want patrol officers to act like SWAT officers. So we had to train them differently, we had to equip them differently, and we expect a different level of performance from our patrol officers. We've learned from the lessons of the active shootings that we've studied, as Jim described, that they're going to end relatively quickly, but in terms of a law enforcement response, we have to go after the shooter in a rapid manner. And we've also learned that if we confront the shooter in a rapid manner, oftentimes they'll commit suicide because they don't want to confront law enforcement in that regard. We equipped our officers with rifles, with a higher level of ballistic gear, and thanks to the assistance of Dr. Smith, we've also equipped them with go-bags that include first aid equipment that will not only save the life of a fellow officer, but may allow an officer to save his or her own life as well. This is a news release related to the incident, the training exercise at Marymount. I want you to take a look at the date for a second, August 11th, 2007. Like many large-scale training exercises in your communities, it took us about a year to plan for this exercise. We had role players, they had the makeup, we knew what we were going to do, we had the cooperation of Marymount University. August 2011. You need to think back just a little bit. In April, I said 2011, in April of 2007 was the incident at Virginia Tech. We weren't clairvoyant, but we expected that type of event, and we were planning and training for it in Arlington. So what did we learn at Marymount? We learned that the police officers reacted exactly how we expected them to train. They went in, they used intelligence, they pursued the shooter, they cornered the shooter in a deep part of the university, but as Jim and I observed the exercise, we observed the role players both playing the role of wounded and dead, and we observed the police officers as they made their way to there. They were communicating back to the incident command post the location. Their expectation and our expectation of the leaders were that there would be some action at that point to go in and assist the non-ambulatory victims to a casualty collection point so that they could be properly triaged and treated. That didn't happen. We realized that as a result of that, many of the victims who were probably suffering gunshot wounds that were survivable would have died because we didn't react quick enough to the treatment of those individuals. So, what did we do? The after-action review, as Jim mentioned, we got with the fire department and we said we have to do something different. You know, as he mentioned, the shooting had stopped. We had addressed that, but the bleeding certainly had not. And we realized that we have an obligation to those victims. You know, we're not robots out there in terms of our law enforcement response. The ability to step over somebody screaming for assistance because your focus is on the shooter is something that needed to be addressed. It really goes to the psychological well-being of our officers as well. You know, we recognize that responsibility needed to be addressed, and it needed to be addressed in a timely manner, and that's how we got to the point that we have developed over time the Rescue Task Force. In this slide, you'll see that, as Jim mentioned, Chief McKay was really a lead in working with our officers to come up with a concept that, you know, if addressed properly, if trained properly, if equipped properly, would get the proper aid to those victims in a much more timely manner. And you know, one of the side benefits to doing something like this, and I will say, unlike as depicted in the media often, and sometimes unfortunately in different parts of the country, the professional relationship between the Arlington Police Department and the Arlington Fire Department has always been very positive. And for that matter, in all of Northern Virginia and the National Capital Region, you know, there's a spirit of mutual aid that I believe is second to none. So we've always had a strong working relationship in that regard. But I think the Rescue Task Force has taken it up a notch. The interaction between our firefighters and police officers at the street level, our captains and captains, our battalion chiefs and deputy chiefs, has grown even stronger as a result of this effort. It's now a regular occurrence that we meet together as staffs to talk about operational impact, and it goes well beyond how we relate in an active shooter. You know, this slide also talks about some of that. You know, mutual aid in today's environment is so essential to an effective response. You see this in every situation. We saw it at Virginia Tech. We saw it even in Atlanta 2 days ago. There are multiple agencies responding to these types of incidents, and our ability to work with one another and to understand tactics is essential to an effective outcome in the situations. You know, we really promote training in our environment. You know, we will take time away from the officer's duty schedule and the firefighter's duty schedule to train together. We'll train together in a roll call environment, we'll train together in an exercise environment, and we certainly see the fruits of that labor in day-to-day operations and everything that we do.